Welcome, here my phone rang at 6:04 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been lying awake for about 20 minutes already, staring at the ceiling the way you do when your brain won't give you peace but your body is too tired to get up. I was in that strange half-alert state where everything feels foggy, but your senses are still sharp enough to notice the light shifting outside your window. It was a Tuesday in early November. The kind of morning that smells like cold and wet leaves even before you open a door. When my phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. A local area code, but not a contact saved in my phone. I stared at it through 2 full rings. Something about the hour made me uneasy, not the panicked kind of unease, just the quiet instinct you get when something doesn't feel right. Most people would have let it go to voicemail. Spam calls don't usually start at 6 in the morning, but telemarketers don't follow rules anymore, and I was tired enough that ignoring it would have been the easiest choice, but I answered it. I don't know why even now I can't fully explain it. Call it intuition. Call it whatever you want. But I slid my thumb across the screen and pressed the phone to my ear, and the voice on the other end was calm and professional in that way that immediately tells you this is not a sales call. Good morning. May I speak with Claire Whitmore? This is Claire, I said. Ms. Whitmore, my name is Daniel Mercer. I'm a loan officer in the lending department at First National. I apologize for calling at this hour. I'm reaching out because we have a time-sensitive matter on your account that requires immediate attention. I sat up in bed. My account, I said. I don't have a loan with First National. There was a pause, short but meaningful. The kind of pause that tells you the person on the other end is recalibrating. Ms. Whitmore, he said carefully, we have a personal installment loan under your name and social security number. The account is currently 92 days past due. The outstanding balance, including late fees and accrued interest, is $84,300. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, it wasn't, but because my mind genuinely could not process what he had just said. $84,000. 92 days past due. A loan I had never applied for, never signed for, never touched. Mr. Mercer, I said, my voice getting steadier as the amusement faded, I need you to hear me very clearly. I have never taken a loan from your bank. I don't have an account with First National. Whatever you're looking at, someone has made a mistake. Another pause. I understand your concern, he said. That's actually part of the reason I'm calling personally rather than sending a collections notice. I'd like to email you some documentation. If you can review it and call me back, we can determine next steps together. He gave me his direct line. I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt I found on my nightstand because that's the kind of morning it was becoming. I hung up, sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long moment and told myself to breathe. Then I went to make coffee because whatever was about to happen, I was going to need it. The email arrived 11 minutes later. I was standing in my kitchen with my mug when my phone buzzed with the notification. I set the coffee down, opened the email and downloaded the attached PDF. It was 17 pages long. A complete loan application and agreement stamped and processed by First National's lending department, dated 8 months prior. I scrolled through it slowly. My full legal name, Claire Ann Whitmore. My social security number, all 9 digits correct. My date of birth. A copy of my driver's license. The one I'd had for 4 years with the photo taken on a day I remembered because my hair had refused to cooperate and I'd complained about it for weeks afterward. A signature on every page that looked at first glance exactly like mine, and then I reached the address field on the application. The address listed wasn't mine. It was 4417 Sycamore Lane. A house I knew well because I had helped paint the living room when the previous tenant moved out. A house with a blue front door and a wind chime that drove the neighbors to quiet frustration. It was my sister Amber's address. I set my phone down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't entirely steady and you don't want to drop it. I looked out the kitchen window at the pale grey sky. I stood there for a full minute, not thinking anything clearly, just processing the slow, cold crawl of a realization I didn't want to have. Then I grabbed my keys. I drove to Amber's house in under 20 minutes. It was barely 7 in the morning by the time I pulled up to the curb outside 4417 Sycamore Lane. The blue door, the wind chime, I rang the bell. Amber answered after a few minutes, her hair pulled back, wearing an oversized sweatshirt and looking like she had been awake for a while. She seemed surprised to see me but not alarmed. That was the first detail I filed away without fully understanding why. Claire, It's like 7 in the morning. What's wrong? I got a call from a bank, I said. A loan officer named Daniel Mercer. He told me I have an overdue loan of over $80,000. Amber blinked. What? An installment loan, under my name and social security number. Applied for 8 months ago. I paused. With your address on the paperwork. What happened next is something I've replayed in my mind many times. Amber's face moved through several expressions so quickly that if I hadn't been watching closely I might have missed them. There was a flicker, just a flicker of something behind her eyes. Not surprise, something more contained than that. Then it was gone, replaced by confusion and then outrage. Are you serious right now? She said. You're standing on my porch at 7 in the morning accusing me of something. I didn't accuse you of anything, I said quietly. I told you what I found. Your address was wrong on a bank document and you drove straight to my house. What does that even mean, Claire? Someone probably made a typo. Banks make mistakes all the time. She was good. I want to be honest about that. She was genuinely good. Her voice had exactly the right amount of offense in it. Her body language was open, shoulders back, the posture of someone who has nothing to hide. And standing there on that cold November morning, I felt something I'm not entirely proud of. I wavered, just for a moment, but it was real. Because this was my sister. Because I had known her my entire life. Because part of me still wanted the explanation to be a bank error or an identity thief who happened to pick her address at random. I was nodding along, already beginning to soften, when her purse slipped off the hook by the door. It fell open on the floor of her entryway, and several items scattered out. I reached down instinctively to help pick things up, the automatic reflex of someone who grew up sharing a house with this person, and my hand closed around a small rectangular card before I even fully registered what I was looking at. It was a credit card, the name on the front read, CLAIREAWHITMORE. I straightened up slowly. I held the card out between us. Amber's face did something complicated and then went completely still. That's not, she started. Whose name is on this card, Amber? She said nothing. Whose name, I repeated, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, is on this card? The silence between us stretched out until it became its own kind of answer. Then Amber said something about it being a mix-up, about meaning to tell me, about it being temporary. About how she was going to pay it back, and I listened to all of it with a calm I didn't entirely feel. I handed the card back to her. I told her we would talk soon. I walked back to my car. I drove home. I made a second cup of coffee. And then I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop and pulled up Annual Credit Report, CARM, which is the federally authorized site where every American is entitled to see their full credit report from all 3 major bureaus. What I found made the coffee go cold in my mug. The loan from First National was there, of course. $84,000, 92 days past due, already flagged as delinquent. But that wasn't all. There were 2 credit cards I had never applied for. One with a limit of $12,000, nearly maxed out. One with a limit of $8,000, also nearly at capacity. Both opened in my name. Both showing months of charges, restaurants, online shopping, clothing retailers, a spa in the city, airline tickets. There was a financing account from a luxury furniture company called Harrington's Home. The balance was $19,000. The purchase date aligned with when Amber had mentioned, casually over the phone several months ago, that she was finally redoing the living room. I sat there and added it all up. The loan, $84,300. The 2 credit cards, approximately $19,700 combined. The furniture account, $19,000. Total debt opened in my name without my knowledge or consent, over $120,000. My credit score, which I had spent years carefully building, making every payment on time, keeping my balances low, never overextending myself, had collapsed. It was sitting at a number I won't repeat here because even now it makes me feel sick. A number that would have made it nearly impossible for me to rent an apartment, finance a car, or do anything that requires a credit check. I closed the laptop. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen for a long time, and I made a decision that I believe, looking back, was the most important decision of this entire story. I decided not to call Amber. I decided not to confront her. I decided not to post about it, vent about it, warn our family, or do anything that would tell her that I knew the full scope of what she had done. Instead, I picked up my phone and searched for identity fraud attorneys in my area. Olivia Bennett's office was in a glass building downtown, The kind of place where everything is clean lines and soft lighting, and the receptionist offers you water with cucumber in it before you've even sat down. I had an appointment the following morning. I'd spoken with Olivia briefly on the phone the night before, given her the basic outline of what I had found, and she had told me to bring everything: the PDF from the bank, my credit report printouts, the documentation I had saved on my phone of the credit card with my name in Amber's possession. Olivia was a small woman in her early 50s with reading glasses she wore on the end of her nose, and the kind of measured stillness that comes from spending decades hearing terrible things and knowing exactly what to do about them. She listened to my entire account without interrupting. She looked through every document I brought, and then she leaned back in her chair and said something that changed the trajectory of everything. "You need to understand something about how banks handle loan signings," she said. "When a loan of this size is processed in person, the bank documents everything. Every branch maintains security camera footage of loan transactions as a standard compliance requirement. If someone sat at that desk and signed your name on those documents, there's almost certainly video of it." I stared at her. "Can we access it? As the named borrower, you have grounds to request it as part of a fraud dispute. And once we file a formal fraud report with the bank's internal investigation unit, they're obligated to pull that footage as part of their process." She looked at me over her glasses. "This is going to take time, Claire, weeks, possibly more. The question is whether you're prepared to be patient." "I'm prepared," I said. "Good, because the worst thing you can do right now is tip off whoever did this. If they know you're investigating, things disappear. Evidence gets complicated. People start covering tracks." She paused. "Does the person you suspect know that you know the full scope of this?" "No," I said. "She knows I found the credit card. She doesn't know I've seen my credit report." Olivia nodded slowly. "Keep it that way." We filed the formal fraud dispute with First National that same week. Daniel Mercer was cooperative and professional throughout. He connected us with the bank's internal fraud investigation unit, where we were assigned to a specialist named Marcus Reed. Marcus was the kind of person who made you feel like things were going to be handled properly just by the way he shook your hand. He was methodical and precise. He asked questions in a specific order that told you he had done this many times before. He explained that the bank's investigation would run parallel to any report I made to law enforcement, and he strongly recommended I also file a report with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, as well as with my local police department, to create a paper trail at every level. I did both. In the meantime, I went back to my ordinary life as much as I could. I went to work. I answered Amber's occasional texts with normal surface-level responses. She sent me a message about Thanksgiving plans. I replied with a question about whether she wanted me to bring the sweet potato dish or the green bean casserole. I acted like everything was fine, and she kept spending. I know this because Marcus had flagged the accounts for monitoring. He couldn't share real-time data with me directly, but Olivia had advised me that any activity on fraudulent accounts actively being used actually strengthened our case. It demonstrated ongoing criminal intent rather than a one-time act. Amber apparently had no idea the investigation had begun. She booked flights for 2. She made purchases at a jewelry store downtown. The furniture company showed another charge, smaller this time, for what looked like accent pieces. She was living a life on my credit, comfortably, confidently, without apparent concern. I let her. 3 weeks after my first meeting with Olivia, Marcus Reed called me into the bank. He said they had reviewed the footage from the loan signing. He said I should come in person and that I should bring my attorney. I wore my most unremarkable outfit that day, dark jeans, a grey sweater, because I didn't want to be memorable. I wanted to be steady. I sat down in a small conference room at the bank alongside Olivia, and Marcus set up a laptop on the table between us. He explained that the footage was from 8 months prior, the date the loan had been initiated. Then he pressed play. The footage was the kind of quality you expect from bank cameras, sharp enough to be unambiguous, wide enough to show the full desk and the people seated at it. I watched the timestamp in the corner of the screen tick forward. I watched a loan officer I didn't recognize take a seat across from 2 people who had just walked in. The woman on the left was my sister Amber. She was dressed in a blazer I had seen her wear before, her hair down, a tote bag on the chair beside her. She looked calm, professional even. She signed the documents one by one as the loan officer placed them in front of her, and every time her pen moved I felt something tight in my chest. She was signing my name. My name. Slowly, carefully, the way you sign a name you've practiced. And sitting to her right, leaning back in his chair with a relaxed confidence that turned my stomach, was a man I recognized immediately. Kyle Brennan. Amber had been dating Kyle for about a year. He was charming in the surface way that some people mistake for substance. He sold cars and liked to talk about investments and had a habit of picking up the check at dinner in large groups in a way that felt more like performance than generosity. I hadn't disliked him exactly. I just had never fully trusted him, though I'd never been able to articulate why. Now I understood. He sat in that chair at the bank and smiled at something the loan officer said, and in the footage he looked like a man who believed he was invincible. Like a man who had thought this through and concluded that it was going to work perfectly. Marcus paused the footage. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully, "do you recognize either of these individuals?" "Yes," I said. My voice was completely level. "The woman is my sister, Amber Whitmore. The man is her boyfriend, Kyle Brennan." Olivia put her hand briefly on my arm, not in a pitying way, but in a grounding one. I took a breath. "What happens now?" I asked. What happened next was the part I had not anticipated, even having tried to prepare myself for every possible revelation. Marcus told us that as part of the bank's investigation, they had traced the disbursement of the loan funds, where the money had actually gone after it was deposited. He pulled up a document summarizing the transaction history. He explained it quietly and clearly, the way you explain something to someone when you know the information is going to be a second blow. Nearly all of the loan proceeds had been transferred in increments to a personal bank account belonging to Kyle Brennan, not to Amber's account, to Kyle's. I stared at the page. "He was the one controlling the money," Olivia said, "half to me and half to Marcus." Marcus nodded. "It appears that way. The pattern of transfers is consistent with someone who wanted to hold the funds in an account not directly tied to the fraud, likely as a layer of insulation." I sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment, processing, because here was the thing. I had spent the past several weeks building my understanding of Amber as the architect of this scheme. And she had signed my name, she had used my identity, she had been the one sitting at that desk while I was unaware. But Kyle had been beside her. Kyle had been the one holding the money. And I had to wonder, had Amber understood the full scope of what she was involved in? Had she gone to him with an idea, or had he come to her? I would never know with certainty, but the financial picture Marcus was laying out suggested that whatever Amber had believed she was doing, Kyle had been the one most strategically positioned to benefit. Which also meant he had the most to lose. 2 days later, Marcus called again. The bank had contacted the Fraud Investigation Division of the District Attorney's Office. The case was being escalated. A formal criminal investigation had been opened against both Amber Whitmore and Kyle Brennan on charges of identity theft, bank fraud and forgery. And then Marcus told me something else. In the course of building his case file, he had uncovered additional evidence from the luxury furniture store where $19,000 in charges had been made. Harrington's home, like many high-end retailers, maintained their own internal security footage. Marcus had contacted them and obtained the recording from the day of the purchase. The footage showed Amber at the counter signing a financing agreement, my name. Again, a second location. A second forgery, documented on camera, but what complicated things further, and here is where the story pivots in a way I had not expected, was what Marcus discovered about Kyle's conversations with investigators once they brought him in for questioning. Kyle Brennan, it turned out, had a prior financial fraud case in another state. It had been settled quietly, but it existed. The investigators knew about it. And when they laid out what they had, the bank footage, the money transfers, the trail of purchases, Kyle did what people with prior exposure and good lawyers tend to do when they realize the walls are closing in. He cooperated. He agreed to provide a full account of the scheme in exchange for a reduced charge, which his attorney negotiated down to a single count of conspiracy, with a recommended sentence far lighter than what he would have faced otherwise. He testified under oath and in writing about who had approached whom, about how the loan had been planned, about how Amber had believed the money would be split evenly, but Kyle had been siphoning the majority into his own accounts. In the end, Amber had taken all of the legal risk, and Kyle had kept most of the money. And when the time came to face consequences, Kyle handed her to the investigators with the paperwork already signed. I want to take a moment here to tell you how I felt during this period, because I think it's important to be honest about it. People sometimes assume that when something like this happens, when a family member does something this significant and this damaging, the process of pursuing justice feels satisfying in some clean, uncomplicated way. Like there's a clarity to it. Like anger simplifies everything. That hasn't been my experience. There were nights during those 3 months when I lay awake not because I was afraid, but because I was grieving. Amber and I had grown up together. We had shared a room until I was 12. She had called me from a parking lot once at 2 in the morning when she had a flat tire and didn't know how to change it, and I had driven 45 minutes to help her. I had been at her side when our mother was sick. I knew the sound of her laugh, and the way she always burned toast, and the specific look on her face when she was trying not to cry. And she had sat at a bank desk and signed my name on a loan for $84,000. Those two things existed at the same time, and I won't pretend they didn't. I didn't cry about it, at least not in any prolonged way. But I felt the weight of it, the way you feel something that has changed the shape of your world, not dramatically all at once, but slowly and completely, the way water reshapes stone. I kept going to work. I kept my apartment clean. I called my mother on Sundays carefully, because our mother didn't know yet, and I was waiting until the legal process was further along before that conversation happened. And I trusted Olivia, and I trusted Marcus, and I trusted the process that was unfolding at a pace I could not control. 3 months after my first call with Daniel Mercer, the bank formally scheduled what they called a fraud resolution hearing. This is an internal proceeding that takes place before the matter goes fully to criminal court. It's where the bank presents its findings, all parties are informed of the evidence, and the fraudulent accounts are officially resolved and removed from the legitimate borrower's name. Olivia and I arrived early. We sat on one side of a long conference table in a room that smelled like new carpet. Marcus sat at the head of the table. Daniel Mercer was there. There were 2 attorneys representing the bank, and across the table sat Amber and a lawyer she had hired, a young man I'd never seen before who kept checking his phone. I hadn't seen my sister in 3 months. Not in person, not since that morning on her porch when her purse had fallen open. She looked tired. But she also looked somehow still confident, still certain. She sat with her spine straight and her hands folded on the table, and when her eyes met mine, she didn't look away. It was the look of someone who still believes they're holding cards worth playing. She didn't know about Kyle yet. The hearing opened with Marcus presenting the documentary evidence, the credit report, the loan application, the fraud dispute filed with the FTC, and the police report I had submitted. He was thorough and methodical and completely without drama. He laid out the timeline of the fraud with the precision of someone who has done this before, and the timeline was airtight. Then came the footage. The bank conference room had a screen set up, and Marcus played the video from the loan signing. The same footage I had watched weeks earlier in that smaller room. Amber at the desk. Kyle beside her. Her pen moving across the pages of documents in my name. Amber's attorney leaned over to say something quietly in her ear. I watched her face. It did not change the way I expected it to. She was still composed. Then Marcus moved to the second piece of footage from Harrington's home. Amber at the counter signing the financing agreement. Her voice remained flat, controlled, distant. She glanced at her attorney again, and then Marcus placed a final document in the center of the table. He said calmly, "We have also completed a full trace of the loan disbursement. Nearly all funds were transferred to an account belonging to Kyle Brennan. As part of the investigation, Mr. Brennan has provided a full cooperation agreement to the district attorney's office." He slid a copy of the cooperation agreement across the table toward Amber's attorney. The room was quiet. Amber's attorney picked up the document. He read the first page. He said something I couldn't hear and slid it toward Amber. She read it, and the composure, that careful, practiced composure she had walked into the room wearing, came apart at the seams, not dramatically, not with tears or shouting. But her face went the color of chalk, and her hands, which had been so still and folded on the table, moved down to her lap, and I watched her fingers grip the edge of her jacket. Kyle had signed a cooperation agreement dated 6 weeks prior. He had been talking to investigators for over a month while Amber had been presumably assuming everything was still under control. The young attorney beside her was already signaling to adjourn. The criminal case moved forward from there. Amber was formally charged with identity theft in the 1st degree, bank fraud, and 2 counts of forgery. These are federal-level charges in cases involving financial institutions, which meant the sentencing guidelines were serious, and the process was handled at a level above local court. Olivia walked me through each step. I provided testimony where required. I submitted my documentation. I showed up where I was told to show up and answered every question truthfully. On the civil side, Olivia filed a formal dispute with all 3 credit bureaus simultaneously. Within 60 days of the fraud determination, every fraudulent account, the loan, both credit cards, the furniture financing was removed from my credit history. The negative payment history was expunged. My credit score began to rebuild. I also filed a civil suit against Amber for damages, the attorney's fees, the lost time, the documented harm to my financial standing. I'm not going to go into the details of how that resolved, because it's still being worked out, but I will tell you that Olivia is very good at her job. The last time I saw my sister in person was in a federal courtroom on a grey Wednesday morning. She was wearing a dark blazer and her hair was done, and I recognized in that careful appearance the same instinct she had always had to present herself as composed and in control regardless of the circumstances. Old habits. I understood it because I have some of the same instincts, and I suppose that says something about the two of us and where we came from. She didn't look at me when I came in. Or if she did, I didn't catch it. I sat in the gallery with Olivia, and I watched the proceedings with the particular clarity that comes when something has finally, fully arrived at its ending. All the quiet months. All the documents filed and evidence gathered and difficult phone calls made with my voice steady and my feelings managed. All of it had built to this room, this moment, this accounting. The charges were read. Amber entered a plea. The judge spoke. I won't detail the specific outcome because some of that is still in process, but I will tell you that the charges against her were real and the consequences were significant, and they did not feel like a victory to me in the way I might have expected. They felt like the truth arriving, that's the only way I can describe it. Not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, something quieter. The way things feel when they are finally correctly ordered after a long period of chaos. A kind of stillness. I drove home alone. I stopped at a grocery store and bought things for dinner. I came back to my apartment, which I still own and which no one will be placing any kind of lien against, and I cooked a meal and ate it at my kitchen table and allowed myself to feel, fully and without management, everything I had been setting aside for months. It was a lot. I'm telling this story now because I want to be useful to someone. That's genuinely why. Because the morning my phone rang at 6:04 a.m. I had no roadmap. I had no script. I had fear and a PDF and a credit report that looked like a nightmare, and I had to find my way through it one careful step at a time. So here is what I know now that I wish I had known then. If you ever suspect that someone has used your identity, whether it's a stranger or harder than that, someone you love, pull your credit report immediately. All 3 bureaus. Annual credit report. CARM is free by federal law. Look at every line. Look at the dates accounts were opened. Look at addresses listed. Look for anything that doesn't match what you know about your own financial history. If you find something that shouldn't be there, do not announce it. Not on social media. Not to the person you suspect. Not to mutual friends or family members. Stay quiet. The quiet is your protection. Find an attorney who specializes in identity fraud. Not a general practice attorney, a specialist. Olivia made the difference between this situation being overwhelming and this situation being navigated. She knew which forms to file, which agencies to contact, in which order and why. That expertise is not something you can replicate by reading articles online. File reports everywhere. The bank, the FTC at identity theft, Gov, your local police department. Create a paper trail that is thorough and time-stamped. Every step you document becomes evidence of your diligence and your good faith. And then this is the hard part, be patient. The impulse when you have been betrayed is to react immediately. To confront, to expose, to make the wrongdoing visible and known right now. I understand that impulse completely. I felt it that morning when I drove to Amber's house before the sun was fully up. But reaction in these situations can destroy evidence and give the other person time to prepare a defense. The better move, the move that actually works, is to let the process do its job while you do yours. Document. Report. Wait. Trust the people you've hired to handle what they're equipped to handle. The paper trail doesn't lie. The security footage doesn't forget. The bank records don't disappear. And the person who believes they've gotten away with something, who is still spending and traveling and living on what they took, is building a longer and longer record of their own culpability with every transaction they make. Justice is not fast. But it is when you approach it correctly thorough. I think about the morning of that phone call sometimes. The way I almost didn't answer. The way I was lying in the dark half asleep, and something made me reach for the phone anyway. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't, if the loan had continued to accumulate penalties, if the bank had eventually moved to collect on the collateral, if I had lost my house before I even understood it was at risk. The thought is cold and real, and I don't let myself stay in it very long. What I come back to instead is this. My sister sat at that desk and signed my name, and she genuinely believed, that she had planned this well enough that I would never be able to prove it was her. She believed that my credit would take the damage and she would enjoy the benefit, and that the gap between what she had done and what could be proven would protect her. She was wrong, not because she made an obvious mistake. She had honestly thought through a number of things. She had used my documents carefully. She had chosen a bank I didn't use. She had been systematic. What she hadn't accounted for was the footage. The IP address that Marcus traced back to an application submitted from Amber's home internet connection. The cooperation agreement that Kyle would eventually sign, the furniture store camera, the paper trail that her continued spending created month after month while the investigation quietly built around her. She was constructing her own case against herself. She just didn't know it, and I was letting her, every credit card charge, every transfer to Kyle's account, every item she bought with money that was borrowed in my name. She was handing the investigators more evidence, and she was doing it confidently because she believed she was safe. That is what I mean when I say that the whole time she thought she was ruining my life, she was building the evidence that would destroy her own. Karma is patient. Karma is methodical. Karma keeps records, and Karma, it turns out, has excellent security camera footage.